Good afternoon and welcome to the Takeup. Today we have episode 67, talking about trade shows. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Takeup. Today we have episode 67. Like I said, talking about trade shows. I'm happy to have you guys in to talk about this today. There's a lot of stuff going on in the world of embroidery, in the world of decorated apparel where I live, and there's a lot going on as far as trade shows coming back. So with the hope of the vaccine, with the hope of people getting out again, is the hope for in-person education and a lot more. But I wanted to have a frank discussion about it with you guys and discuss what you're thinking about as far as your attendance of trade shows. Maybe in general, what have you gotten from going to live events? What do you think the pros and cons are? And I'll talk about my experience going to trade shows, my experience teaching at trade shows, and why myself and a lot of my compatriots are going to start going back on the road here shortly. So I would really like to have any kind of input you want to bring in. By all means, jump in, go to the comments, type in your experience at trade shows, what questions you have, what things you're looking forward to or not, and let me know what you think. We'll have something to talk about as far as virtual education versus live education and the entirety of this experience as far as not only trade shows and what we've done, what we're going to do as far as these in-person events, but what we have done in this last year with virtual events. In any case, I think there's room for everything. And by the way, if you have questions that are not related to trade shows, that are related to embroidery, related to decoration, by all means, you can put those in as well. But I really do want to hear some of your opinions if you want to talk about it. So let's go ahead and first just let you guys in on the first thing that I usually do, which is the links list. So make sure you know that any links that are going to be there that we're talking about today will be on this links list and available to you. So with this link, we're going to have things about trade shows themselves. We're going to have some other content as well that's not related, as I usually do, and some stuff that's not from me, because I like to bring in other experts from the field to let you guys have a chance at what they know. So let's just go through a couple of things and let you see what's up there. Number one, because we're talking about learning and multiple modes of learning, I'm going to go ahead and have the link from the earlier episode, episode 48. We talked about the modes of education, the modes of learning, and what makes that work for people as far as learning embroidery digitizing. So if you're interested in that kind of verbal or physical or auditory modes of learning and what that might mean for you and how these things come together, check that out. We talked a little bit about how it is to deal with virtual learning and what can be, on offer for you. So that's there in episode 48. I'd love to have you guys take a look at that. You're also going to see a couple of links to trade shows, because I'm going to discuss that I'm actually already signed up to teach at some trade shows. This first set is from a Decorated Apparel Expo. The DAX show is kind of a regional Midwestern show. There's 3 sessions of that, and I'll be teaching digitizing at those. There is a link. Sometimes these previews don't show up on the links list, but you'll still be able to go through to click those. So if you click those, you'll see them. This is Impressions Expo and Impressions Expo, which was once ISS, and Print and Sportswear shows. I'll be teaching a little bit at that one as well in Fort Worth much later in the year. But that's going on as well. Also, we have a couple of other episodes of other shows that I think would be interesting to you. There's one here from the Two Regular Guys. If you guys don't know Two Regular Guys, this morning we talked a little bit about trade shows. We had Clay Barbara from CorelTrainer.com talking about the Irving show in Texas and how that went for him. And we had Terry also, who had gone to the Irving show, kind of the first show back since the pandemic. But what I also have here is something from a good friend of mine and a good friend of the show, Jay Bassell, from quite some years ago, where he talked about making the most of trade shows. So if you're planning on going to a trade show, I would check out this episode and the link right after it. This printwear article, despite being an older article, has a great sense of what you should do to prepare yourself to go to trade shows to get the most out of them. So I think that's pretty interesting. And we also have a piece here from the Two Regular Guys. This is actually a link to the previous week's show that has some great stuff from Jeff Fuller and Justin Armento when they were on, but it also has a list of the current trade shows for the end of the year in the show notes. So we can refer to that as well as get some awesome embroidery education from those guys. And the other links that are here are about my experience teaching. I have an article called What I Learned While Teaching that we'll cover a little bit today, where I talk about what I learned in the process of teaching at trade shows, and a couple of other links that are just fun stuff, like the definition of the Socratic method. I'm always going to say something thinky here, and that this will be one of the terms you might want to talk about. It's a method of arriving at some greater truths by having some arguments and stuff. We're not going to actually get into the Socratic method, but when I say those words, here's a definition to what that is. And then links, of course, to a couple other things. I've got upcoming virtual classes. If you guys don't know, on patch making, there's the free session tomorrow morning. And then there's also next week, a longer session, a paid session, where I'm going to be talking all about patches, how to make them, how to sell them, and the like. So those two things are there, as well as one last little bit, which is my discussion of how embroidery and digitizing contests are judged at trade shows. Because I'm going to talk about one of the other things that you get from trade shows is not only inspirational material when you go look at contest entries, but you can get some industry recognition from participating with trade shows and industry magazines. But that's all there in the links list. I like to give you a look at that stuff before we get started. But with that, let's go ahead and see who's in the comments. We'll say hi to everybody, and then we'll get into the meat of the matter today. So first thing, we have a few people on. Jeff Fuller says, excited to hear your thoughts. A Fuller Embroidery Works and Embroidery Nerd. Yeah, I mean, met you at a trade show, so we'll have to certainly talk about that. Christine Shreve, who's representing the Applique Getaway, another great trade show. Good afternoon, Eric. It's been a busy afternoon, so this is a nice oasis. Glad to hear of it. I mean, busy's better than not busy, though I understand. I've got a lot going on myself, and I'll say this next week or so is going to be a heck of a ride. And honestly, with the signing up for these new trade shows, like now that I'm going to be teaching at DAX, having to get things developed and worked up pretty quickly. Luckily, I'm going to teach some stuff that they requested that I teach a very similar session to one that I've done before that people wanted to have come back. But it's stuff that you have to get ready and you have to prepare. And honestly, I've got to start booking flights. So yeah, busy here too. Just in from Sweden. Hi. Happy to have you in. Cindy King out of Texas. Good afternoon. Great Friday. Mary says hi. Happy to see you in here, Mary. Frank from over in the UK. Good evening to you and everyone on that side of the pond. Honeybee saying, I can't wait to go to the trade shows. I learn much better hands-on, and I also appreciate the networking. Absolutely. You have to recognize that the thing that we think about with trade shows, we often think about the vendor floor. We think about the education, certainly those of us who are going to educate there do. But what we don't always imagine when we're thinking of the trade show experience is the networking and what that means. But we're going to get into that today more. Justin Armenta of GA Digitizing and of the Embroidery Nerd, good afternoon to you too. And Jeff Fuller says, I thought trade shows were really going to suffer this year, but I hear there's a lot of registrations. Without giving away who said what and when, absolutely. I'm hearing the same thing. Lots of registrations, a lot of people who really want to be at the trade shows this season. And in fact, the classes that we've heard from, if you listen to the two regular guys this morning, Clay Barbara came on from CorelTrainer.com, and his classes were full. He had 70 people in a trade show class, and this is in Irving, Texas, which is not one of the larger trade shows necessarily. Not to cast aspersions, some of the smaller trade shows, really the regional trade shows, if you want to call them that, have a really great interactions and a lot of people who are coming together with a purpose. Because I'll say this about the Decorated Apparel Expo shows, the DAX shows, though I have been to the real large, what we would often consider national and international shows quite a lot. I teach at the Impressions Expo in Long Beach, which is really thought of as kind of like the big show for most folks for the year. Those shows are great, but I would say that the engagement of people at the smaller regional shows like the DAX shows is very high. And I will also say, from being someone who has run a booth, I've run a vendor booth at trade shows as well. When you're running vendor booths, what I find is that the larger shows, you don't get as much individual engagement. People walk by, they stroll by, they're browsing. It's not necessarily the same kind of experience. Whereas these smaller regional shows, you may get a great deal of individual attention and people really kind of checking in. So I would say that engagement tends to be a little higher. And I honestly, from what I'm hearing, the registration is high everywhere. People are ready to go back. And that's not, I know not everybody will be ready to go back, but for those who are, there's going to be a lot of people who are going for it. Alan, who's coming in today. Alan Howe, if you haven't seen Education Friday, him and Marshall, you have to check him out. Hello, Alan. Happy to have you in. Cindy says, we always go to the Long Beach show, so that's Impressions Expo, because it is at the first of the year. New products are out, and in Texas, the Fort Worth show is late in the year. New stuff is old. I will say this, though. I actually got to see, if you haven't seen the hat heat press, the 360 heat press from Stalls, we saw that at Fort Worth, and they actually showed it in separate meetings off of the show floor and on the show floor at Fort Worth first. So I wouldn't, don't count out Fort Worth. Fort Worth is a good show, and it actually has some other great stuff like the judging for the Impressions Awards happening at Fort Worth. At least I went and did some judging there, and that's something cool too. So, one of those things that I like to talk about certainly is that each of these shows has their own merit. And I would say Fort Worth is great because it also lets everybody from the middle of the country kind of come together. It's a little easier for people from the central states to get to Fort Worth than it is out to Long Beach or out to, say, Atlantic City, which are two of the other ones that people like to go to quite a lot from impressions. But yeah, I will say Long Beach, a lot of people choose that to be the show. And hey, I can't argue Long Beach, California in January sounds pretty good for a lot of us, even up in the mountains in New Mexico. Still, it's pretty nice in Long Beach to walk around in January. I can't lie about that. Arnaldo is in, and good to see you, man. Aaron Montgomery says thinky. Yeah, I can be a little thinky sometimes. I can be a little cerebral when I want to, my friend. Lisa Shaw saying hello again, and Lisa agreeing with me. Hopefully, I don't know if I remember what you're agreeing with, but hopefully, yeah, I think that there's a lot going on that is good in the trade show space. Like I said, are there pros and cons and costs? Absolutely, there's costs. Are there things that are difficult to deal with at trade shows? Are there reasons why we like virtual education? Yes, we'll cover a lot of those as we go. Jocelyn saying, hey there. Sharon is in from Ohio. Marta is in from Texas. Glad to have you here. Christine says, I feel you on this. I'm teaching 3 classes at Applicate Getaway, and I have a lot of prep to do and book my flights. Yeah, I had to make a lot of difficult decisions about what I would and wouldn't do. And it took a lot of soul searching and talking with my wife to figure out what I was going to do and why I went out to do DAX this year. So we'll talk about that. Leanne says, I am new to this. I've never been to one. What I will say is I absolutely think they're a worthwhile experience. You will have to make your judgments as to whether or not it is worthwhile to go so far for you this year. I will say this. I've had both of my needle sticks and I am supposedly good to go. So I'm going to give it a shot. But I recommend that everybody, you apply your own conscience, decide what you think is right for you at risk-wise. But yeah, for me, I've decided that there's enough call, not only because I want to get out and see people and what have you. It's not, for me, it's not so much that as I've had so much call for in-person education because there are people who really don't jive with the online education as much. People really want that in-person experience. And as I talked about in that episode about learning modes, some people really do need a more hands-on, even with lecture classes like mine tend to be, they want a more hands-on experience and more interaction. Something else we'll talk about. I decided that it was something I felt like I needed to do. And because I thought it would help out the industry getting back to normal. So I'll be honest. But yeah, I absolutely believe that. So yeah, Leanne from Aaron Montgomery, they are well worth it. Networking, learning, and the ability to make connections are worth their weight in gold. My favorite of the DAX shows. Yeah, I have I have a lot of DAX show love, you have to admit. And Christine too, love the DAX shows. I'll miss speaking of those shows this year. Yeah, and we'll miss you there, truthfully. Leanne says, Leanne already said that she hadn't been to one, but let's go to the other comments. If Jocelyn here saying, I need to look for some near me, I will try and list the shows at the end of the show here. But yeah, DAX shows, that's going to be Kansas City, Minnesota, and the Chicagoland area, Tinley Park. We certainly have the Impressions Expo in Texas. We've got Indianapolis with GPX, which is the Graphics Pro Expo. There's a lot going on. And like I said, I will list them later, but there's likely to be something somewhere near a region to you. Depends on where you are. If you're out in the outer reaches, then maybe not. But there are more of them than you think. And I would say, like I said, the DAX shows, which are regional, which are Midwestern. Some people might think they're really small, but the education is top notch. And there are lots of great vendors there. So I would still recommend people go. Alan says, I think everyone has Zoom fatigue. And you know what? I would have to agree with you to a degree. I'm still doing virtual teaching. And if you've seen me teaching, I'm live every week doing this. And I'm also doing webinars. I think that there's a place for it for everyone, but especially for those of us who are creators or who are doing a lot of work that's online, I think that makes it even more likely for us to get a little bit of Zoom fatigue. And I will say, certainly a lot of people have entered this space of live shows. No lie, I entered right before the pandemic started doing live shows. And I actually did it not as a reaction to the pandemic, but because I just wanted to have another place to do these shows to bring people in for content, for education. However, since then, I've seen so many people go live, and I'll admit this, I love Education Friday. We started that before the pandemic kind of kicked off, but there are days now where every 2 notifications that I get is someone going live, and there would be no way for me to catch it all. And I think there is some merit to the idea that a trade show silos all of this down to a particular period of time, and that might be worthwhile in and of itself. So we'll go ahead and grab a couple more people. Alan says, I think Fort Worth will be the big show of the year. Yeah, we'll have to see. I will have to have to talk to you then because I'll be there. And I believe, I don't know how much is announced yet. Jeff Fuller and I may well be sharing the stage together because we have a panel from Madeira that should be coming up at Fort Worth. So you'll see me on stage and as well as doing my own seminar for the education there. But here's the thing. I've also done Impressions Expo, Impressions U. So you'll see me online as well as in person. And I think that's the thing is that I think lots of us really have different modes of learning. And hopefully, as we return to trade shows, as we return to live education, those of us who really prefer that and get more out of that will have a place to go. But Jeff says, I'll be at Fort Worth, might have some swag to hand out. If you're an embroidery nerd fan, go get yourself some swag for those guys, or maybe work him into a nerd star. I don't know. That's probably what you'd be carrying around. If you don't know, go to the embroidery nerd group and you'll find out about the nerd star little patches. All right. So Cindy King says, oh, we always go to Fort Worth, but to get with the new trends, Long Beach. Yeah, like I said, early on in the year, Long Beach, California Impressions show is a fantastic show. I can't lie. It is, however, costly. It is one of the more costly ones to go to for a lot of folks. Is it the kickoff for most big stuff? Absolutely. When I was running booths, that's where the big announcements happened. No lie. However, I will say that I understand when people choose to go to Long Beach maybe every other year and go to the regional shows in between. There is still quite a lot going on there. Julie says, hi, Julie. Happy to have you in. Aaron just booked his flight for Applique Getaway, and that's something that Embrilliance is related to. We sponsor Applique Getaway as well, so love to see those folks getting some love, and Aaron teaching there is wonderful. Regina saying, hi, Eric and others. I remember when you hadn't been to trade shows, and now look at you. The thing people don't know about me is I actually am not, as Terry Combs of the Two Reeler Guys calls it, I'm not necessarily a carny. I haven't done it for decades. Trade shows for me are still within the last few years. I spent a lot of my time in a company that didn't really value trade shows the way that a lot of companies do. And I'll say we were a little behind the times with that. I endeavored to reach out myself and learn things online and to communicate with people. And I managed to keep up pretty well, but we really didn't do trade shows. And I spent many years of my career kind of chained to a desk. And it's always the joke with Two Reeler Guys is that I would be digitizing while I'd be on their show. And it's absolutely true. I chained to a desk just doing the work. I mean, doing the work is very valuable. I will say getting the inspiration is absolutely necessary out there too. And I think it's useful. Jocelyn says somebody needs to do one in South Georgia. Love Georgia. Love being out there. Got to spend some time out in Atlanta for sure. Love to see some trade shows out there. I'd surely go. I know there used to be some shows out that way. And Aaron says, I'm a newbie to the live show too, started in 2013, so still figuring it out. Yeah, right. Sometimes, man. And then Alan says, we started because of the cancellation of ISS Atlantic City because of the pandemic. Yeah, and we were actually a little ahead of the game there. So I think that's the thing. I started out because, honestly, Brian Bailey, creator of Brilliance, wonderful guy that he is, and Lisa Shaw, who is here in the chat with us, kind of said, hey, go ahead and start. The only way you're going to get this going if you want to do a show is to get it started. And Crystal chiming in from Maine says, I've always wanted to go to a trade show. And I'll say, I think it is a really valuable experience that everybody should have at least once. And hey, if you're going to choose one, I would say of the two, my big favorites are certainly going out to Impressions Expo in Long Beach in January is a fantastic show, no lie, but I really love the DAC shows, especially if you're looking for more one-on-one interaction with the vendors and honestly, the more intensive classes. I've gotten to teach things at DAX because they go on for the 4-hour workshops that I do. They've allowed me to teach things that I just can't teach in any other place. So it is still one of those things that I really value. Aaron says, let's grab a couple more comments before I go. I thought it was odd that they changed you to a desk, but at least you can still get on the phone to call two other guys. Absolutely. Love to be on that show. And then Christine says, Women in Business podcast started because of the pandemic. Wanted to put some good in the world and amplify women's voices. That was a great way to go. I mean, honestly, there's nothing wrong with starting because of the pandemic. And in fact, I'm glad that so many people have managed to get on board with both podcasting, live shows, with doing content, with sharing their voice, and with virtual education, because there are some definite pros I'm going to go into as we start talking about the subjects here. And Lisa, by the way, love this. Lisa Shaw says, I started after hours because I was getting burnt out from trade shows, and then the pandemic hit. Yeah. And I think there is something to having our own space to discuss things that isn't controlled by the trade shows. Because though I love the trades, and I'm going to talk about how great I think they are, when you're doing trade shows, there are certain things like the fact that they are going to select topics. Everybody who's an educator like myself knows. In fact, I've had students ask me many times, hey, why are you teaching this topic? I really wanted to see you teach X other topic. And I will tell them, hey, I submitted 10 topics and the ones they picked are these two, and that's what they are. You will have somebody who's organizing things for you. That's why doing things like this live, where I can discuss wherever I want to, or like working with Aaron Montgomery at the Decorators Community to do the webinars that I'm doing now. I can teach things that I select to teach virtually that I couldn't really do in a trade show. I can pitch and I can hope and I can try and bring enough people to make comments on their website or to send them messages to indicate that they want to see me teach a certain thing. But ultimately that the format is out of my control. How the room is set up is out of my control, and what they do with the recordings, what they do with that stuff is out of my control. So that's something that I will say, yeah, you can get burnt out from trade shows, but I will say that they have so much value that I don't want to throw them out. What my contention is, and I think I can go ahead and, as we get into this, kind of expand on it. My contention is that there's a room for all of this. That we're not going to get rid of the live trade show forever. We're not going to dump it because the virtual stuff showed us that it was entirely unnecessary. I don't think that's the case. And we also are not going to, by any means, go all the way back to physical trade shows because we miss each other and we're desperate for hugs and never do another virtual learning experience. In fact, I think the virtual experiences, if anything, now that everyone's used to doing them, for the people that stuff has worked, for the people that find the virtual experience to be superior for them, or who don't have the ability to get out to the trade shows, the virtual experience will not only continue, but will be enriched by the fact that so many more people have gotten into it. So I think that's kind of how it is. I will hope that we all kind of get to where we belong in this. I know myself, I'm kind of currently riding the fence. I'm doing both. I'm going to be doing live shows and I'm going to be doing the virtual stuff, and we're going to see, how that pans out. It may turn out that one or the other gets scaled back for sure. But I will say that the choice to go back this year was a little faster and maybe not planned as far out as you might think, because that's something that we needed to do. So let's go ahead and grab a few more comments and we'll get into the topics. Letty says, I think you'll see a whole canvas change. People found virtual to open a door to a new platform. People are missing the personal interaction after a year of lockdown, but we will see the stage change to a combination of both platforms to succeed, go forward. Hands-on with some additional virtual options. Absolutely. I think that's the case too, Letty. I agree. With Aaron, I agree. Great point, Letty. I think that it really is the case that we will find that people have different needs. And because there has been an uptake, also, honestly, because people have become able to use all the technology and to benefit from it. When there was no choice but to be on Zoom, when there was no choice but to attend lives, people learned how to do it and make their way. And for those that made it work, made it an educational option for themselves, for those people, I think they're going to continue to want to do that. And they're going to be selective about live events that they do, and certainly will look forward to virtual stuff. Now, and also I will say this, all of the different trade show providers, all of the education providers have also spent time learning what they needed to do to get virtual off the ground, meaning that they're more likely to provide hybrid options because they now know what they need to do and can price that out as well. So I think that's absolutely part of the conversation too. Alan says, I didn't submit anything for this year, took a year off. Yeah, I get you. I actually did not really think about doing this year either, but when approached and it was kind of clear that I was a top choice for the DAX shows specifically, I did decide, after hearing from so many people that they wanted to see me out and wanted to go back to the trade shows, I decided to do it. But I agree. I thought about taking this year off myself, and I really, I was surprised at my own decision to some degree. At the same time, I do understand, having had so many people kind of petition me or entreating me that this is the kind of learning they really approve of, that they want to do the in-person learning, I decided to go for it. So it is one of those things. Let's go ahead and grab a few more comments. It can be a circular thing, says Christine Shreve. Appearing at trade shows can help build an audience reputation, and you can allow them to branch out and do your own thing and build your audience further. Absolutely. And remember that even as decorators, you are going to be able to self-promote and make relationships with other decorators across the country. You may find that you can make collaborative agreements with people, meeting them at trade shows. And a lot of the things that we have managed to do across country with other people in the trades, with other people we might refer to, maybe we get a request from a region that we don't work with, that someone else can work with them better, or vice versa. A lot of those relationships come out of trade shows, and there is something about meeting someone face-to-face when you can. Crystal says, I have a toddler, so I appreciate replays and the pause button 100%. 100%. And I will say, I like the hybrid model where something that is live is still recorded and you can purchase your way into the recording. Those have actually been around forever. You can, at the Impressions shows, before they became the Impressions Expo at ISS, there were always the ability to purchase your way into virtual experiences or recordings. I think we're going to get to a point where that is a de facto standard and it's not the extra mile. It is what people need. So I think that's one of those things. Fanny says, virtual is great for folks like me who are overseas, gives an insight on global trends and competition. Absolutely. By the way, it's also one of the reasons why I publish articles over in the UK with Images Magazine and why I like to read Images Magazine. I found out that there are a lot of things that are different. When I was previously, I was working for an international company. And when I did so, I learned that things like pricing, things like the way we do execution, what markets are important are very different. And talking to people in the UK who told me that, yeah, they don't do hats ever in embroidery. Like caps are just not a thing for them. And it was stunning to me to deal with that. And also the way that pricing was done was so different that it really was interesting to learn. And it gave me insights on things that might change, that I could change in my own business. And I think that is very useful. Also, I know that there are countries for whom the concept of the trade show really isn't the same as it is here, where the mass amount of education, the other things that come along with the trade show that aren't just vendor stand-up booths aren't common. For those folks, it really is a big deal. So that's one of the things that I really look forward to. Let's grab another comment, Christine Shreve. We're trying some virtual class options, the Advocate Getaway this year, kind of a hybrid event. AG did a virtual event last year, it was very successful. So we're combining what we learned and what we know in the 2021 show. Yeah, absolutely. I see that all over the place. Like I said about Impressions, they've got Impress You or Impressions You. I think it's Impress You, the online university thing, which is essentially a collection of all the stuff that they've done, as well as doing the live shows. And I know Dax is still running the shorter seminars live, and there's only a limited number of workshops, of which mine will be one. But there's a limited number of workshops that are going to be on site. So I think everybody's dipping their toe in the water and kind of figuring this out right now. So, and yes, I will. There's some jokes in the comments. I will acknowledge. Alan says, yes, but you're a rock star. Hardly. I am, like I always tell people, I'm like a duck on the water. I might try and look cool above the neck here, but underneath the water, I'm kicking my little feet. There's a lot going on, my friend. And Aaron says, on top of rock star, Eric is an internationally renowned rapper, E-Rich. If you don't know the E-Rich joke, you're not tuning into the Two Regular Guys. Yeah, people don't always get what that little H is on the end of my name, and so I occasionally get E-Rich as the reading, but it's German, folks. It's just Eric. Don't worry about it. I could pronounce it correctly if you like, but you don't need to. All right, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in and discussing that stuff. I want more of your comments as we keep going on, but look at how much time we've done just getting to talk to you guys and explain what you feel about the trade shows. I love that. So thank you for tuning in, and thank you for coming in live. Even if you're not live, if you're on the replay, please jump in the comments. People will answer those comments later, and I like to come in and answer them and like and check you out. So definitely still comment after the fact. If you have feelings about trade shows, about live education versus virtual education, I'd love to hear about them in the comments later down the road. But let's go ahead and talk trade shows a little bit more. I'm going to go ahead and cover a few topics that I think are interesting about trade shows and what I think they're useful for. Certainly, I'm just going to talk about what trade shows are and why I think people value them as much as they do. I mean, number one, what do we always think about first? Probably product demonstrations. We're talking about vendor booths. When we're going to trade shows, whether or not we're looking for brand new technology, if you want to see something hands-on, if you want to put your hands on a garment, if you want to see a decoration method as it's working, you want to see a machine in action, this is where it's going to happen. You'll be able to see things that you couldn't see otherwise. And especially we're talking about embroidery machines, multi-head embroidery machines. It's not like you're going to have one delivered for a test. People will be showing the newest machines and new equipment at trade shows. That's one of those things that in person is really hard to replicate. And I will say that despite the fact that I love video demonstrations of stuff, and yes, sometimes we can zoom in and look at things that you couldn't see live, being able to see something in person, watch it operate, see how it works, especially if it's a new kind of operation, a new kind of way of handling a machine. When we first had, like, say, adjustable presser feet, things like that, seeing those in person and how they were being worked on, and then talking to the technical people who understand how they work best, because frequently, especially at the more prominent trade shows, you'll not only have people who are there to sell, you will have people who are very deeply knowledgeable. I know I love to hang out in the ZSK booth and talk to people there. Talking to Nick at ZSK booth is always great, and Andrea, because they're talking about real world projects. They're talking about the technical stuff underneath it. So product demonstrations are important and hard to get through when they're not live. I would say it's not quite the same. Love to see them, but the live really makes a difference. Certainly, this is the other thing I hear all the time. And I don't know, these days, I don't know if this is really necessarily such a deal as it used to be, but everybody wants show specials. What I'm going to say is, if we're talking about things that aren't literally on the show floor that someone from the display area doesn't want to ship back, then I think most specials are going to be honored across the board. Most people who are trying to sell are going to sell. The thing that still happens with quote unquote show specials are people bring equipment and supplies that they don't want to cart back somewhere. And sometimes what you're going to get is on your last day, you can get a demonstration machine for a discount. But at the same time, show specials, I think we are far beyond the time where only trade shows had specials, and usually in concert with launches and product launches and trade shows will be some other kind of special. Now, certainly people who are in the equipment business can talk me out of this and say, no, the show specials are real. But I'm going to say that, yes, there are still other specials to be had, other discounts to be had, but people still are out there hunting for show specials. And certainly I will admit, having run a booth, if I could have sold off the stuff I had that wasn't all display materials, I probably would have too. So that is a thing people are still looking for and go to shows for. Certainly not only product demonstrations, but product information. Just to be able to go and collect up information if you're the kind of person who literally wants hands-on guides. And some things really are great to have physically, like thread cards, like color charts, sample products, things that you can actually take home and use as physical samples to show somebody the nature of a thing, or to look at on the show floor the new rounds of garments or in apparel that are out and actually get your hands on them. Then this product information is something that you can't exactly get without ordering a bunch of samples in or something like that. And some things, like I said, like color cards, things that have a physical component, you can sometimes get those for free at the shows in a way that you wouldn't have those same samples for free ordering them from your distributors. So product information and product samples certainly are still a thing on the trade show floor. And I think that's fairly natural. Those are the things that are like the low-hanging fruit that people want to get to. I'm not going to say whether or not I think those are the most valuable thing. In fact, yes, I will. They're not the most valuable thing at the show. For me, they're not the most valuable thing at the show. I will say that you can tell someone who's just come to the trade shows for the first time by the size of the bag or the wagon of junk that they're hauling out with them. People who have been to the trade shows quite a lot are more selective about what they pick up. If it's your first time, you may be getting every promotional thing that someone hands to you, every sample that someone hands to you, every brochure someone hands to you. After a while, you'll be making a plan and only selecting the things that you really want and that are important to your business to haul back in your suitcase or to drive home with. So it really depends on what you're there for. But those are the classic low-hanging fruit things people are there for. Certainly, we're going to get into vendor communication. If you want to talk to somebody in your region, especially if you're in a show where your regional salesperson very well may be at your show if the show is in your area. So vendor communication is great. And sometimes if you go to the larger shows, you can go up the chain. I've had this happen before where you're talking to your vendor and you can talk to somebody a little further up the chain than you usually get with your individual salesperson. And sometimes you can get relationships working, especially if you're working with any sort of, higher volumes or margins. You can get to some people that you might not have otherwise gotten to. So vendor communication is certainly there. So these things are, like I said, these are the basics. These are the things that you expect from a trade show that are the classic, I'm walking up the aisles, I'm looking at booths, that's the thing. And certainly, of course, we can talk about education, and we will. So education, the fact that there are live seminars, and certainly there are both free seminars, paid seminars. We can talk about the difference between those. Often free seminars are going to have some sort of sales component to them. So there will be maybe a little infomercial quality to these, where at the end, we're going to be talking about a specific product. As we all know, if something is entirely free, then you are the product. That's something that you should think about, is that there's probably something being sold there, and that's everybody. However, usually that education, if the people are honest, and a lot of people in this industry really are, if they're really fair dealers, then they're going to be there to educate as well. But then there's the opportunity for paid education, and a lot of the paid seminar tracks are not going to be that way. And in fact, the ones that I tend to frequent, almost to a fault, will have you not mention brand names, not mention products, aside from showing tools that are available. And like I said, I think that there's room for both kinds. I think that certainly you can also have education that's paid, that is specific to products, that is specific to certain certain types of decoration, and that might go into more deeply one brand, one product, one tool. However, paid education has a tendency to be more education value because they're looking to make sure that the product is the education itself. If you don't learn, that's a problem for them, whoever is doing the presentation, whereas some of the free education may not be. I will say, though, in this industry, I've found that more of the free education is worthwhile than from what I've heard from other people in other industries. So education is certainly there too, but there are some things that you might not fully expect from the get-go. Certainly, it's not just vendor communication. I think it's relationship building. We can build relationships with vendors, with each other, with other people in business in a way that you may not be able to do online, or at least that's not as natural, not as serendipitous, not as spontaneous as you do in person. So when you're at these places, I think one of the best things that happen is the people who you talk to, the people who are in educational experiences with you, maybe the people who become your partners in a new venture, or the people you lean on, especially because when you collect yourselves up from a region or beyond your local region, the other people that you talk to, the other decorators that are near you that you strike up conversations with, won't be your direct competition, but will be someone who knows something about what your life is like, what your business is like, and you may be able to help each other without the concern. And like I said, I think that co-opetition is the way to go, and that even with your local people, you shouldn't be in cutthroat competition, but without the concern for that competition at all. So I think that relationship building is a really huge part of this. And I think we'll revisit this several times as we kind of grind through the topic. But relationship building is huge, and it's not always seen as a reason to go to the trade shows. I did see people talking about networking, but networking and relationship building is huge, and for multiple reasons. For the classic business reason of knowing other people in your industry and making connections with someone who could help you and who you could help in return, but also for literally being around people from your own tribe, from your own group, who know what it's like to live like you do, who you can talk to. This is valuable in and of itself, but that happens extensively at these trade shows. So I would say that's something that I think is very useful, as well as, like I said, self-promotion. It's a good chance that someone will need a product from someone like you. How many of us have these kind of networks of partnerships for people who are looking for a region that we don't service, or looking for a product we don't service, but that is adjacent to what we do? This is a great time, if you're an embroiderer only or an embroiderer primarily, to find a large screen print house, to find someone who is handling something in the decorative apparel business that you don't do. And I would say, even if we're talking about art, even if we're talking about home and hobby, it's a great time to talk to other people and get into relationships with people who can help you figure things out. So certainly relationship building, but also promoting what you can do and finding other places where you can express yourself. Whether, like I said, whether or not this is craft and art, or it is commercial the way I am. That's certainly part of it. And then one of the other things, industry recognition. When we participate with, say, industry magazines, with competitions that happen at these events, with the digitizing competitions, things like that, we can get industry recognition, and we can get wider acceptance from other people in our industry. And that with that recognition can come opportunities. It's something, once again, it's not just from being at the trade show. This is something you have to sign up for, but there is something to it. And honestly, in building relationships and just being seen at the trade shows, discussing things, handing out business cards, old school, or being in educational experiences with people, having that conversation about something, trading some questions and some ideas, there's recognition from other people in your industry, and there's a chance for those opportunities to open up. And honestly, it's a chance for you to kind of gauge what's going on there in general. It's a chance for you to develop awareness about what's happening in the industry at large, what other people in the industry around you are doing and where they're at, and for people to become aware of what you do and what you offer. So this is all part of the trade show experience. Can this happen virtually? Absolutely. Do I think it's a little more serendipitous, a little bit more likely to build into unexpected and kind of interesting combinations live? I think so. It doesn't mean it's impossible online. And in fact, I've gotten some of my greatest relationships with people in the industry online, especially because I started out without the opportunity for trade shows. But it has been amazing to me how many kind of sudden and very powerful relationships get made over the table, over the booth. That's something that I think is very useful. But let's go ahead and grab a couple more comments while we're talking here. So let's have a moment to talk about it. So let's see here. Let's grab Aaron saying, yeah, it's the shipping savings that makes for great deals. Absolutely. And Alan says, and I can see how this would be the case for booth runners. On equipment, best to have the machine pre-sold so it's picked up at the show. Yep, that'd be a great way to go. Cindy says, I like show specials. Hoopmaster always has a special. Great from other vendors. Even free freight is great. Absolutely. Aaron says, you have to be able to take it off the floor and drive it home. Drayage and shipping can be 30 to 40% of the cost of equipment vendors' trade show expense. Absolutely. I have paid thousands of dollars to have things moved 50 feet. If you are running a booth, that's often the case. So that's why people are usually willing to do that. Lisa says machine floor models usually have great prices. Absolutely. So it's still a reason to go. And I would say, like I said, there's only so many machines, but it's still a reason to go if you really are at the buying point. And Aaron says, yeah, great point from Alan. Reach out to equipment folks before the show to make the best deal. Knowing they have it sold will be huge for equipment folks. Absolutely. And Frank says, this is why we love the trade shows, freebies. And Alan says, sample vultures see the same ones every year. Some folks are real sample gatherers. I am not there. But here, Brian Bailey, Creative and Brilliance, has a point that I really go to. Making personal connections with your vendors can make your relationship with them more enjoyable and your use of their products more profitable. Absolutely. Not to mention, they do hear you. They do hear you when you're there talking about things with the company, when you're talking about the relationships with them at the trade shows, and you keep showing up live to the trade shows to discuss things, you will show up in their kind of memory over time. And it's something that I think is worthwhile. Being someone who shows up at the trade shows and engages with them can be, and hey, don't get me wrong. There are people at the booth that you see and you're like, oh boy, here comes trouble, because you know you've got a lot to answer for, or that you know that this person needs a lot of work. But at the same time, those people are getting that attention. Even the ones that are hard for us as vendors. Those people are getting that attention at the trade show. And I hate to say it, sometimes it's just a lot harder to ignore people in person. You can't miss an email in person. It's not something that I do. I'm always trying to answer all my messages as best I can. But what I will say is, if you're desperate to get an answer from your person, certainly talking to them directly is not a bad way to go. But I would say that Brian's right. It's making that relationship with them can make it more enjoyable. And honestly, there are sometimes things that just don't come up in the case of emails. Like I said, there's these serendipitous connections that get made. Somebody may have just been working with somebody else that had a similar problem, and they've arrived at a solution that they didn't have in mind before you showed up. Or multiple people show up to the booth discussing something together, and the conversation that happens between the people at the booth as well as the vendor can end up informing something greater. It's the same thing as the education. When the people who are at the educational event, whatever this is, at the seminar, at the workshop, start sharing questions and answers between each other, and then maybe even come up together and talk to an educator at the same time, you can arrive at things that you might not have arrived at by yourself, that you might not have brought up on your own, that you might not necessarily have from the educator either, if they hadn't had all the input from everybody from these different places. Plus, you have people coming from these very different spaces. They have different kinds of products they do. They have different kinds of customers that they serve. And this varied information coming from all these people, when it comes together and we have this kind of confluence of all these different kind of ideas, these different business models, sometimes we have these happy accidents, these kind of, like I said, these serendipitous connections that really wouldn't happen any other way. When you mix everything into that pot, the things that come back out, the chemical reactions that happen are sometimes really interesting and would not happen without everybody doing that exchange all at once. Once again, can it happen virtually? Absolutely. I think that it's sometimes quite a bit easier when we're at the trade shows. I think that's true. So let's go ahead. And Frank says, I have a nice collection of hats. Me too. Me too. Fanny says, what would you recommend to attend for someone like me that runs a stock design e-commerce to get interactive with consumers, hobbyists who would buy these type of designs? Go to a consumer or hobbyist show. The truth of the matter is, for a vendor, for someone who sells, sometimes the only thing you can really do to get your product out there is to be on a booth. But it would be worthwhile to go to a trade show anyway to see who's offering what. And you never know, you might be able to strike up a relationship with someone else who is also a stock design offer, who puts up stock designs on offer. There may be some other business partnerships you could have with the vendors. And if nothing else, you can see what people are offering and decide whether or not a booth is worthwhile for you. I would also say, honestly, go to networking events and talk to other embroiderers who are out there. But I would say, certainly for you, if it's stock design e-commerce and it's consumers, it's hobbyists, go to a hobbyist show, go to a creative show, Applicate Getaway, go to one of these shows where people are in that space where it is hobbyists transitioning over into cottage industry is probably a good place for you. Think about the people who are essentially using your product. Who are those people? Where would they want to be? And that's where you want to be. I know it sounds really simplistic, but it's true. I wouldn't necessarily say that your best chance is to go to the biggest commercial show, because honestly, the commercial shows are going to be less stock design, less hobbyists. Look for that hobbyist show. Look for your ideal customer, your consumer. Where are they going? And in fact, if you already have a business going out there, ask people where they would want to see you. If you have people who are buying from you, ask where are they going, and try and find out what you can do for those folks. And Aaron is right here. He says, look at Applicate Getaway and reach out to Christine Shreve. Absolutely. I think that's a good chance out here for sure. And I think that's a good way to go. Alan also says, we met for the first time at trade show. Absolutely. Got to meet Alan at trade show. And honestly, I've met most of my industry friends at trade shows, because really it was not usual for them to be coming in and out of my shop. So that's something pretty interesting. In any case, I would say that you meet people within your industry, you meet people outside of your industry or adjacent to it. And also some of the larger shows will have multiple kind of adjacent industries together, where you may have people who are working in print, you may have people who are working in signage, who are working in car wraps, who are working in traditional paper printing. If you're going to like the Printing United shows, there are places where we have these connections that come together that are not common in our business life, or at least they are not as common. Plus, it's just a sheer density thing. The density of people who are interested in this topic is very high at a trade show. And the fact that any other social event that you're going to do around the trade show, if you show up at the hotel bar, I hate to say it, but that's one of those places. You show up at the hotel bar, you show up at the local eatery that everyone's going to, you go out to an actually scheduled mixer or networking event, and the density of people who are interested in what you do and have opportunities available and or are looking for opportunities that you might be able to offer is high. It's a high density of that kind of communication going on at any given time. And that's one of those reasons I think is particularly useful. And Christine as well, I met you for the first time at trade show too, and we've had some epic dinners since. Absolutely. Absolutely. And, that's one of those things. I would say that you can't assume that you can't make any assumptions about what you will and won't do at trade shows, who you will and won't meet. There are things that are going to come up. It's not going to be awesome for everybody. And I'm actually a fairly shy person. I kind of open up first online, or open up through something that I have to share in the business space, in the embroidery space, and then talk to people. So I'm going to tell you this. It's not just that only the people who are social butterflies, only the people who are incredibly outgoing, the extroverts are going to be benefiting from this. I'd say me personally, I tend to be a little introverted. At the end of a trade show night, I'm pretty burnt out. But at the end of that night, I will also have talked to people that I would not have talked to if I hadn't kind of put myself in that space and made that possibility something that was available to me. Like I said, though, the thing is, it's not necessarily the same for everybody. There are risks. Especially now, there are things we have to take into consideration. There are costs. So this is not just a love letter to trade shows. Do I have a deep and abiding love for trade shows? Absolutely. I think that trade shows really made me what I am right now, as far as being able to teach, being able to educate. Certainly the magazine scene, which has admittedly, I think, shrunk to some degree. It has contracted quite a bit. But what you may or may not know is, generally, if you're looking at industry magazines for decorative apparel industry magazine publishers are usually running these shows, or the other way around. Events runners, people who are running the shows, are also publishing industry magazines. So that's really a connected kind of world. Now, certainly I did a lot of writing before I was at trade shows, but at the same time, that connected industry specific world of publishing and of events really, I think, made me able to do what I'm doing here today, and it gave me the chance to talk to everybody out here now. So I do certainly have that kind of deep and abiding love for the trade show and for the magazine system. However, I think that the virtual education side of this thing, well, number one, I don't think they're in conflict at all. I think that they are really going to be synergistic down the road. And I hate to use terms like that. Synergy has become an overused kind of junky business term. But I think that there's going to be a cooperation and a melding of these things to a point where it's all part of the same kind of system that supports the industry and helps us learn. However, I think that there's things that we can talk about with that, right? We can talk about the difference between the two. We can talk about education, and we can talk about the difference between live and virtual education. Certainly, when we're talking about live education, what do I think is the most valuable live education? Well, questions and follow-up. Q&A periods are great online. Love them. I'm going to have a kind of a VIP Q&A at the end of my free thing tomorrow. So people are going to pay a little bit and end up getting to ask me whatever questions they want and be live in the room on a Zoom chat where we can all talk to each other and have some of this experience. But the ability to pull away into small individual groups to discuss things with your neighbor, with your seatmate, with someone else's who is in your situation, in your class, is a little easier at the trade shows. And it tends to happen, like I said, once again, it's more serendipitous. It happens spontaneously. Two people end up watching a demo of a product. And as they're watching the demo, they talk amongst themselves about ways in which this product could be used or things that they're doing in their own shops. The same thing with the education. People have a tendency to accidentally sit next to somebody who has information they need, or in hearing someone else's question live and being able to hear those interactions, you build your own question, you build your own ability to kind of address a topic. So the questions and follow-up are fantastic. Plus, I'll say we are, for good or ill sometimes, we are locked into our education spaces. We are there, we are on site, and we are certainly there to work. Those of us who educate, we are there to work, we're there to answer questions, and we're not off to run away, we're not off to do something else, we're not cutting off at a certain hour most of the time, aside from being booted out of the rooms. We are frequently there to answer questions, and we're on. We are in business all through the day of the trade show, through each of the days. And in that case, we're really down to talk shop, and we're available for more questions than we might be in a virtual space. Virtual space has some more boundaries, I'd say, to a degree, but at the same time, the virtual space does allow for people to get other kinds of follow-up, to have recordings and other things like that. So there are ways to kind of play this to both sides. I will say that I've seen more interactions that I think built to something that was that had those spontaneous connections, like I talked about. Those conversations opened up into things that people didn't expect from the get-go. And I think that's what makes live education very interesting and important. It very quickly becomes more than the sum of its parts. It is more than just the questions that are answered and the education that's being provided. It becomes something more because of this kind of collaboration from all of the people who are there, as well as whoever is the expert in the front of the room. This is more than educators and questions and answers. It becomes relationship building. It becomes potential partnerships. It becomes a set of questions that are spontaneously generated out of the entire feeling of the room and the reaction live to the equipment, not to the equipment, but to the answers, to the education, and sometimes to the equipment, sometimes to the demonstration, sometimes to whatever's happening in the space, or what is happening on the show floor. The influences that are all there become inspirational to make this happen. And I think that that's something interesting in and of itself. And let's grab a couple comments here to say that. And let's see here. I had to pay that VIP fee just to get in the comments. Cannot comment, LOL. Yeah, sometimes that's how that works when you're doing really free stuff. And what I'm going to say is that stuff is not because we're trying to make a lot of money. Those VIP fees are entirely small. What they're usually used for is promoting this stuff to get more people in, and that's the case. But it's a personalized experience. When you do the virtual stuff and you get the VIP rooms, it's also because people who don't have skin in the game can't derail it. Within the last year, I'll say it's something that I've seen virtual that was kind of a downturn from the virtual space, is that some of the entirely free opportunities that I've seen there, people will get derailed. Once we get into the question answer session, the people who are in who don't have skin in the game are asking questions that could have been answered by looking through the materials that were there, or because they weren't really paying attention. They didn't have any vested interest in paying attention to what was going on. And I think sometimes it's okay to say, hey, with a little bit of a fee on the front end, it means you have skin in the game. It means you're paying attention. It means that you're also giving something back to the presenter. And I will say, I tried to keep a lot of my virtual stuff this year a lot more affordable, and certainly kind of readjusted to the fact that there are more people out in the space doing education. But having watched people's free educational seminars get derailed by kind of free riders who weren't really put into it, let me feel like it might be okay that we put a nominal fee on things and and certainly I think we're providing more value for that than certainly is being paid in. It's not like there's not the value there, but I do think that it's worth it. And honestly, I've found myself to some degree, even when I know I'm not going to attend things, I've been paying for educational stuff that I didn't pay for before, that I wasn't involved in. Number one, to support people who I think are worthwhile voices in the industry, even if I don't think I quote unquote need their class. Sometimes I'm paying for that class because I would like to support them. And number two, because I think that even for myself, if something is important enough for me to learn it, I want to have skin in the game. I want to have something purchased in so that I'm paying attention, so that I'm tuned in. So I think that's part of the case. And yeah, no, but that's one of those things. I like to talk about that though. And like I said, Fatty says, I'm not worried about the price. No, I agree. I'm not calling you out or saying you're worried about the price. I'm saying that this is a question that's come up. How valuable is the information? And people are sometimes feeling, and sometimes rightly so, that you're being nickeled and dimed to death because there's little paid experiences all over the place. I would say if you look at traditionally what things cost at trade shows versus what they cost virtually, I think the virtual experiences are giving a lot of value, and sometimes the trade show tracks can be fairly expensive. And honestly, the other things that trade shows do that are difficult to deal with, well, certainly they cost. They take time. They take effort. The cost of appearing at a trade show isn't just the cost of getting in the door. The door is usually free, and it's not even just the seminar costs. You do have to pay for Transvit. You have to get there. I mean, they're very rarely in our hometowns unless we live somewhere that's a hub. So the cost to get there is definitely a thing. The cost to stay in a hotel, the cost to feed yourself, the cost to haul people around, absolutely. And also, this is opportunity cost. We're not going to be in our businesses during this time. We're not going to be able to work during this time. So the time is definitely a thing. We have to take the time off, but it's not a vacation. The article that I put up in the links list from Jay Bassell says, hey, welcome to the trade show. This isn't a vacation. It's a thing where you're working, and that investment is worthwhile, but it does cost and it takes time. It takes effort. You do have to put effort in because you're not going to get much out of it if you just appear. If you show up to the trade show, walk through the aisles, you don't really pay attention, you don't take notes, you don't talk to anybody, and then you disappear at the end of the day and run off to the vacation. I mean, maybe you get to write that off on your taxes, but it won't really return as much as it would have. And then there's the things that virtual gets right. I mean, if we're talking about live versus virtual, which is part of this question, the virtual ability is to provide more reach. There's more reach. 100%. Whenever I tell somebody the dates that I'm going to be at trade shows and the places where the trade shows are, the first thing someone says is, it's always someone who is from off the beaten track or who is not near to one of these places or can't afford currently to get out to the trade show. They'll just say, I can't get there. When are you going to be in X town? When are you going to be in Socorro, New Mexico? When are you going to be in, this place in Oregon? When are you coming to this part of the world? When are you going to be in Montana? That's what I hear whenever I tell people where I'm going to teach. And I know that that's a real difficulty for a lot of people, myself included. I'm in Albuquerque, New Mexico, which is almost like an island. There is so much space around me that really getting anywhere costs quite a bit more. Getting a flight anywhere costs a bit more. I usually have to take a connector to a lot of places. There's may not be direct flights. I mean, it's gotten better over the years, but there may not be a direct flight from where I'm at, and things might be difficult for me to get out. I understand how it is living out in the middle of the desert. For those of you who don't know, New Mexico is about the size of Germany, and right in the center is Albuquerque, New Mexico, with not a lot around it. A lot of open land out here. And so I understand sometimes reach is a thing. I mean, trying to get out, especially in the US where we have quite a lot of distance to cover, it's quite a big deal sometimes to get to a trade show. So you get reach, you get access. There are people who could never really either afford the time, couldn't leave their businesses alone, or couldn't afford to go to trade shows, who can't afford the rates to get into online education. So access is a big deal. Access and affordability. Number one, access because maybe you never have the time to be on that schedule. You can't take the time off, or literally because the way you work or the way your business works, especially if you're kind of a second shifter, this is a side job to you. So not only are you working a normal job, you are also a 9-to-5 job. Maybe you're now working on your business on the side. Imagine that now you have to schedule time off of your business and time off of your day-to-day job in order to do trade show work or to go show up and research. That access may never be there. It may be very difficult for you. And that's where virtual is useful, because the virtual experience allows access to those people on their own time, generally, because we have frequently recordings involved. And so we end up with replayability. You can actually replay things, and it helps with retention, because any information that you take in, you can play again, you can look at, you can learn from a second time. These are things that are useful in the virtual space. Now, I'm going to tell you, I think we're going to have a lot more of our online components be the same as what we're getting in-house. I think what we're going to end up seeing is more and more of what used to be recorded for the people who are going to trade shows being not only widely available, but specifically being released out into the world virtually. And in fact, I wouldn't be surprised at some point to see people doing fully hybrid events where there are comments on the side of the screen like we have at the same time as they're teaching live. In fact, I'd love to see that, especially if we could get a class of people to moderate these things, like the good Aaron Montgomery, who is here, the wonderful guy that he is, who's going to be moderating my chat tomorrow morning. I think that if we could get to a place where that happens, there's really an opportunity to allow this replayability, this affordability, this access, this reach to be part of what we're doing when we're discussing things, even on the trade show floors, even in the rooms, in the seminars surrounding trade shows. I think there's room for that. But the thing is, these things have been done well. Things that we've learned during the pandemic about doing virtual learning, I think should be carried forward. And there is a reason to say virtual has benefits. A lot of the people you hear them talking about trade shows, and it is just the love letter. I'm going to tell you the truth of the matter is, trade shows have an incredible power to them. Live events have an incredible power to them. Virtual events do too. They're different. They're different. They have different things that they can help us with. They can provide for us, and they're both very valuable. And I think don't have to necessarily be in competition with each other, or they may just have different audiences. So I think that's how that works, right? So let's go ahead and talk to some comments here and kind of speak to that, and we'll get back to kind of finishing this up. I think we'll leave this to be a fairly short show. I'd like to talk about more detailed technical stuff coming up. If you guys have some digitizing topics, some embroidery topics you want to talk about, absolutely hit me up for those. But with everyone discussing the return to trade shows, I felt like this was a good time to kind of talk about this. Lisa says, one thing to be aware of when you go to trade shows as an observer, the vendors, digitizers invested in a booth and have skin in the game. Not cool to be a walking vendor trying to sell your goods on the show floor. Yeah, this is true. It's one way to alienate yourself from your peers you're hoping to network with. Certainly, if you're only there to paddle yourself, especially if you're not kind of skin in the game, having a vendor booth, not doing that kind of stuff, there will be people who see you as that, as Lisa said. Certainly, I would say going into a competitor's booth and trying to hit up their people will be a big no-no. Nobody will like you for that particular thing. I will say people do that sometimes. But what I would say is most people in good faith who are trying to network, who are trying to develop these relationships, are going to be fine. But yeah, as an observer, people have skin in the game. And when they have a skin in the game, and like Lisa has her company there as well, and she's teaching, probably have a fairly dim view of people who show up and don't kind of pay the cost of entry and do the work, but want to come and poach customers. At the same time, you should go and network and find out what's going on. Frank says, I like to do the whole 3 days. First day, collect information, who I want to talk to the next 2 days, visiting the stands and meeting people. Yeah, I think that's a great way to handle that. And I would say, if you look at that article from Jay Bissell, he talks about the different things you can do to make trade shows worth your while. And I'd say this is virtual stuff too. Prepare yourself, have a plan, know who you want to talk to. But at the same time, when you're doing trade shows that have a large vendor floor, walk the entire floor at least once. And don't stop. In fact, what I like to do is the first time through, I want to walk the vendor floor and just make notes of the things I want to go back and see later, and then go back and check out what's going on. Because even though you could plan out of the initial releases of information from the trade show companies, where they're going to show you who's there, kind of show you the booth layouts, you never know exactly what you're going to get till you get there. I think walking the entire floor one time is very useful. That way, once you've seen what's out there, what's available, you can go back and visit again later the things that are important to you. Those certainly make appointments. You'd be surprised. A lot of the people will have the ability to make appointments with people who are on the floor. Some of the trade shows actually have apps that allow you to contact vendors and make these appointments for stand-up meetings. That is very valuable. If there's someone you absolutely know you have to talk to, if there's some machine manufacturer or materials manufacturer or educator that you absolutely must see, make appointments ahead of time. And I think that's a great way to handle it. So yeah, definitely make a plan. But yeah, I like what Frank said. Do the whole 3 days you want to. A lot of shows are only 2 days these days. They've cut that third day out. But they often have education early. They'll have like an early evening education or an education day during setup, because honestly, people are already there. The vendors are already there for setup. They will often have workshops on a day before the show floor opens. Then they're going to have show floor, and you have 2 days of show floor. Still a great way to handle it. Go collect the information, then come back. Cindy says, having replay is great. Talking about virtual stuff. Yeah, having replay is great. Some things you are learning may not apply to a later time. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I would say that's a worthwhile thing. And also, like I said, talk to the people who are doing the live education. It's surprising how many of them are recorded, and there may be an option for you as well. But yeah, virtual education has that going on. And also sometimes there are things that are just easier to show. I think it's sometimes easier to see people, talk to them, see the slides when you have them in your hand, when you're at your home computer. And sometimes, like we said, pause and replay can be very valuable when you can't give the time up, or if you just want to absorb something, get some retention and listen to it repeatedly. So that's one of those things. Anyway, we'll go back and forth real quick to a couple more comments. Got some fun stuff. Lisa says, we are happy when the travel fairy blesses Eric so that he gets home in a relatively decent time. I have some pretty bad travel luck. I have been on the bad end of planes breaking down and of events happening that shut airports and random weather, blizzards in Arizona, stuff that you can't explain. So yeah, traveling for me is always a mixed bag. It's not always much fun. And if I ever get nervous traveling, understand that it's only a conditioned response over years of having to travel go poorly. So there's that. Aaron says, I love that a short show for Aaron in 61 minutes. Yeah, no. Bonus time only gets official on the Takeup after an hour and 15. That's how it goes. Letty says, are you coming across the pond? Probably not for a bit. I would love to. At one point, there was some talk of doing the ZSK stuff in Germany at some point. I would love to go to the UK and do a show, but currently there's no plans. If there's some opportunity that becomes available, yeah, for sure. Love to. But I will be honest, even when I'm doing the shows, people will tell me like, oh man, it costs so much to go to a seminar. Unless you are presenting something else or running a booth or selling something, a lot of the time it's kind of an act of charity to go to the shows. You have to have some other reason you're there, because being paid as a speaker, you're really not. I don't want you to feel bad about this. I don't want you to think that we're, us poor people who are up in front of the shows. I mean, we know that we're also building our brands as well. We know that we're getting that attention and people are understanding who we are and seeing the products that we are connected to, or seeing the other educational stuff we're selling, whatever that is. The promotion is still there. But what I'm going to tell you is that what you get paid by the organizers, it's not necessarily going to be a break-even kind of prospect for you necessarily. So if you see that maybe some of the people do consulting on the side or something else like that, there is a reason why they do. Those opportunities don't generally pay for you to be out there. And a lot of the shows they're not really compensating you in any way, shape, or form that would not make it where you need to have some other reason to be at the trade show. So like I said, yes, it costs a bit to go to the shows. No, it's not all funneling directly into our pockets. Yes, it's something that helps out the organizers to pay for the things they need to pay for. And yes, we get paid to do speaking, but we're there because we love it. Because we're not making a ton of money speaking. There's not it's not like we're having our writer honored and only green M&Ms in the back room. We're not being rock stars like that. It's it's something you do as a labor of love because you want to teach, and certainly because absolutely it does promote other things that you're working on, people you're working with. There's no lie that that's a big portion of it. So I would say, yeah, when opportunities make themselves apparent, I will do so. But going overseas right now for trade shows, it's hard enough sometimes to cross the states and make it make sense, let alone to do other things. So yeah, like I said, it's more you need to be there because we want to be in the space. But yeah, it does make it hard sometimes to do things like go overseas unless we have a huge market there that makes sense for, let's say, a product we're working with or what have you. But yeah, would love to go overseas. Haven't done so yet for that. And if I can, I will. Suffice it to say, let's go ahead and see. Aaron says, what? You told me for the emblems clamps you had to have green M&Ms only. You weren't showing up. Is that the Eric standard? Yeah, he's lying. I don't make requests like that. And honestly, I think I try to be pretty honest and nice about the things I want. Mostly what I want is enough equipment to get the job done. Sandy says, I have a tendency to get distracted in virtual events. I do better at actual events. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's the case. A lot of people feel that way. And I think that some people really feed off the feedback. They like to sit and take notes. They like to be in person with someone. They like to shake hands. And yeah, Brian, I'll agree with you on this one. If you know of any good shows in the EU, please let us know about them because we just don't hear of them here. Absolutely true. Absolutely true. And like I said, it really depends on your customer base. It depends on what reasons you have to be out there. Like I would love to go out, but it's something that we would probably do for the love of the industry more than anything else. but that's the truth. I will say that, we don't often get a chance to cross over. I would love to, especially because I have all my readers out in the UK who read Images Magazine at some point. Would love to, but that's something that, it depends on why you're out there. What I will say is, in general, when we're talking about these events, I'm going to say one more thing about these events to kind of like put a bow on this as far as I'm concerned. What do I think is worthwhile here? We're talking about, once again, trade shows, sure, but the live versus virtual question. For me, and I'm just going to say, why did I decide to come back? So I said, I know I kind of touched on that, but I said that's where I would finish out. Why do I think my compatriots are doing so? My other people in the decorating, educating space, why do I think they're going back to trade shows now? I think a lot of people really want to reassure everyone that things are going to be okay, that we're going to get back out of this. And we know that just the same way that the people previously who I said, right, didn't have the ability to go to these things, that the reach wasn't getting to them. Yes, those people were out there. And now that virtual events have come to fruition during the pandemic, we finally got to bring them all in the tent. I think the thing is, like we saw earlier, that we have comments where essentially we're saying, as Sandy says, she gets distracted in virtual events. We have other people who don't learn as well in that space. I think a lot of us are coming out to say, all right, we wanted to pick up all the people who can only do virtual and for whom virtual is the choice. And we're super glad that we managed to pick them up during all of this. But now we don't want to leave the people behind who really feel that the live event is where they need to be too. And I think for me, there were those two kind of competing feelings of like, there is some risk. Is there a chance there is a COVID variant out there? Yes, there is. There's a lot of chances. I could also get hit by a bus. I mean, these things are there. Now that the vaccinations are starting to take off, now that I am personally vaccinated, I feel safe enough to go out. Will I wear a mask in the plane? Probably. Will I go out to the trade shows and talk to people? Also, yes. However, I had a feeling, especially after talking to people and getting requests to go out, that there really was not only a desire, but there were people who felt like they were being left behind by the virtual events. For those folks, I think it makes sense to go live, and I'm hopeful. Could things still change? Absolutely. Could I end up not being able to go? Could we have another wave? All of these things could happen, and we will have to react as we do. But I think that the concept of throwing out live events, it's very much like the concept of work from home versus offices. Will we never have another, brick and mortar store? Absolutely, we'll have brick and mortar stores. Absolutely, people go to offices. Will we allow more people to work at home? Yeah. And for some people, the productivity has been better that way. I think the notice here is to say we can reshuffle, learn from what we've understood to be this new world, this virtual event world, this virtual work from home world that happened during the pandemic, and say, here are the things that are good that we can take forward. Here is the balance we can achieve between the two things. How can we get the most benefit out of both and not leave anybody behind in the process? That's why I'm going back. That's certainly it. And also because I want to help the people who are having these events. It has been a hard time for the people who hosted these events and really were the champions of our industry. These people who are trying to get this education out and making sure it was possible. If they've got people signing up for those events, I want to be there to help them and make sure that they've got something to teach, that they've got someone there to present and to be there for the events. And that's part of my choice too. But that's what I think. Do we think that we're going to be completely out of either side of this? I don't think so. And I think now that we've kind of opened up the concept of virtual events and we've made them work, I think we'll see more of that. I think there will always be people who also want to do their own thing. We've talked about that too, how there will be more individually led events that are held online entirely by smaller groups. I think that absolutely has opened up and there's no putting that genie back in the bottle, and I wouldn't want it to go back. However, I think there's still room for both, and I'd like to see where the new synergy is. I think we only get that way, though. We only get to this new version of what the trade shows can be, what education can be, if we all kind of join in and find out what makes sense. And it means there's some experimentation to do, and I'd like to be there. So that's what it is, man. That's what I'm thinking. That's where I'm at. And now we'll go ahead and see what turns out. We'll find out. So let's go ahead and finish this out. We have a couple more things to cover. Like I said, I'm going to just jump into the links list real quick and give you the links for stuff and let you know things that are going on with me and in general. So let's go ahead and share the screen one more time. We'll pop this stuff up and say, what do we have going on? Well, certainly I told you guys about the events that I was doing. I will say, go back, check out this. If you want to talk about learning modes and see if there's something to be learned about your best mode for learning, definitely check that out. The Takeup episode 48 has that going on. If you want to see me live this year, I mean, unless something else goes on, certainly you can see the online seminars on the DAX show, but you go to daxshow.com, and that is in the links list as well. You'll see all the event information for Kansas City, July 9th and 10th, Treasure Island, Minnesota, August 3rd and 4th, and Tinley Park, Illinois, and that's August 27th and 28th. Those are the official dates, but there will be stuff going around that time as well. But I'll be there on the Fridays of those particular episodes I'll be teaching. You'll also find that I may have to do some pre-recorded episodes or some other kinds of episodes, maybe even from the show floors on those days, because those are going to be on Fridays for the Decorated Apparel Expo that I'll be teaching that long seminar. So we're going to do the long workshop version as we're out there. The other thing that we talked about today would be the Impressions Expo in Fort Worth, and that is September 10th through 12th at the Fort Worth Convention Center. That's out in Texas. If you have a chance to check that out, as I said before, as you can see, Impress You Online, powered by Impressions, 365 days of learning. They have the online stuff there as well, so you'll find the stuff that I taught earlier in the year online will be there now. However, you're going to see all of the other stuff going on at the conference and the other people there live for Fort Worth. So that's coming up, and I'll be there. Like I said, pending. We'll see what happens with the rest of it. And I think that's one of the ones that I'm looking forward to as well, because I'm going to get to meet some people that I haven't gotten to meet and see some people that I haven't gotten to see for quite some time. This is the article that I shared, and it's an older article, but I think it's still a great one. Jay Bissell, like I said, friend of the show and personal friend of mine, he discussed how to attend a trade show and get ahead. This is from years ago, but I think the topics are still really worthwhile. So check that out. Gives you some tips from before the show, during the show, and after the show to do your research, to kind of get the most out of it, and then to do the good follow-up. And I'd like to definitely encourage you to go check that out. Like I said, just because it's an older article doesn't mean anything against it. It's always a good one. So I like that. One of the other articles there is what I learned from teaching. And I think that this will give you a little bit of an idea of the things I came across after my first round of teaching at DAX. And I think it was certainly an interesting world that was opened up to me to understand what was going to be different. I thought it would be just like the virtual learning and the webinars that I had done before I got out to the trade shows. But I'm going to tell you that it was a very different world, and that I learned quite a lot. And I think that it was a great improvement for me. I found a lot of value in trade shows and in teaching live. So I think that was something that's really interesting to talk about, and I would like for you guys to take a look at that as well. As far as the other immediate events, the virtual events, you can find those all at decorators.education. Tomorrow morning's thing is why emblems and patches, and I'm going to very briefly, it'll be a short show or a short webinar where I'm going to discuss why I think it's important to include emblems and patches in your machine embroidery catalog. And there is the ability to sign up for a Q&A thereafter. That's part of that's kind of a VIP package. You'll get a patch design from me, and then you'll also get a Q&A session. So we'll be able to talk about live questions there. And that really goes just to help fund the other thing, which is the next week. And that will be understanding emblems. And that's a much longer session where I'm going to essentially get to recap and expand on classes that I've done before about patches that I haven't gotten to teach in a little while. And we're going to talk all about patches as far as what's available in the patch space and how to sell them, as well as how to digitize borders, how to handle patches, the different modes and methods for making them. And we're going to go over kind of the education that I've done previously. We're going to expand on that, and we're going to talk about that stuff all on the following Saturday. And that's going to be a longer session. That's a number of hours. I like to, it would be easy for me to tell you it's 2 hours. It's not 2 hours. It'll probably be closer to the 3-hour mark, grand total before we do that. And of course, that comes with Q&A as well. So those are all available from decorators.education. You'll see that stuff here, why emblems and patches. That's going on tomorrow morning. And then next week, 7 days away, 7 days and 21 hours, will be the training class for understanding emblems. And like I said, all about how to do small run emblems, why you'd want to do them, and how we handle those, digitize for those, and execute those. And that's all coming up in this next week. So with that, folks, I think we'll go ahead and call it a day for the Takeup. I think that all you guys have been awesome, and I love to have you reciprocators here. Honestly, you have been giving back great feedback, And I would absolutely love to have you guys in and commenting on any of this stuff. If you know what you would like to see me teach in the near future, please comment on this post or contact me through any of the social media opportunities that are there. And I cannot wait to see you again next week.